focus on the, I guess, the risks and rewards and the balance for small businesses when it comes to protecting themselves from data breaches and also complying with data privacy laws, which are changing daily and will continue to change. So I thought I'd start off by giving you just an overview of the presentation, and what I'd like to do is try to keep this as close to the time allotted as possible, while also providing some time for questions as well. So if there are any questions, we'll take them at the end. If there are subjects that I skip over quickly, most likely they will be some of the laws. That's because I have a lot of the text in here that will be available to you. You can either contact Chris or me to get those emailed to you. My contact information will be at the end of this presentation. So first, we're going to go over why cybersecurity is necessary. Then we're going to talk about the impact of a cyber attack on a business. We'll go over some current privacy laws. An important footnote here is that data privacy is not the same thing as cybersecurity. Data privacy dovetails with cybersecurity, but they're not the same thing. And I'll go into that in a little bit. We'll also talk about some of the types of attacks that you may have seen or you will be seeing, and what should you as a business owner or an employee be doing. So first, why is, there's a little bit about me. First, why is cybersecurity necessary? Well, as you can see from the following statistics, there's an exponential increase in cyber attacks. And I expect that these numbers are going to climb quite a bit, especially with all the folks that have switched to remote working. A lot of these cyber attacks are now aimed at small businesses, whereas before you saw the Targets and the Home Depots and the Equifax and the Yahoos being targeted. Now these cyber criminals are targeting small businesses. They're an easy target for cyber criminals, or at least they assume that they are in an easy business, especially because they are a backdoor into the bigger companies. That is how Target got breached. It was an HVAC contractor. So you can also see that these are some more stats. You can see how the complaints and losses have climbed over the years. The moral to this story is that cyber crimes are not going away. In fact, they're getting more creative. They're climbing higher and higher. Unfortunately, Ohio made a top 10 list for not a good reason. But here is where I want to point out that clients, especially my clients, are constantly weighing the risk versus reward with respect to cybersecurity and data privacy. Historically, small businesses really didn't have real numbers to weigh the risk versus rewards of becoming secure. So there really wasn't a compelling reason to implement a cybersecurity framework or any other privacy components in their data storage to comply with privacy laws. Now, with the data privacy laws becoming more widespread, having a lot sharper teeth, as well as the decline in cybersecurity breaches and losses by companies, the risk and reward comparison is changing quite a bit. And now I'm seeing a lot of small businesses start to look at this with a finer point and talk to me about what they can do to become more secure. So I wanted to give you a little bit on why small businesses need to prioritize cybersecurity, and I'm going to talk about the real losses, the real problems with a breach. But this is something new. So now we're seeing, especially in Georgia and California, where directors are facing personal liability for breaches. Why? Well, we already know that directors have a fiduciary duty to their company. So in the Equifax case in Georgia, the the plaintiffs sued the directors. They didn't just sue Equifax, they sued the individuals because the directors knew that there were vulnerabilities in their cybersecurity systems. So the Georgia judge refused to dismiss the lawsuit, where almost always would have been dismissed, but in this situation, we're seeing that individuals are starting to incur personal liability. And in California, we're looking at not only directors, but directors and officers. And that's the Yahoo case. So next, I want to turn to and give you a brief overview of some data privacy laws. Now, these are laws that govern data and how it is to be treated. Almost every company that is connected to the internet somehow collects and stores data, whether it's personally identifiable information or just aggregate information like zip codes, gender. These laws are governing how data is treated. We're also looking at how it's stored, and what we're seeing, especially in states like California and New York, and this was started in Europe, we're starting to see that individuals are getting a property right in their data, more so now than ever. So we're also, these laws are also talking about what would happen in the event of a breach. And you're going to hear me reference the stick and the carrot. I think a lot of us know what the stick and the carrot approach is. I'll just say this up front. Ohio takes the carrot approach. Almost everyone else takes the stick approach, and I'll explain. So these are some of the privacy laws that I have detailed in this presentation. We're just going to really go over the first four, and it's a very quick overview. The first one we're going to talk about is the ODPA, or the Ohio Data Protection Act. So that was adopted, first that started off as Senate Bill 220. It was recently adopted in the past year or two. And the ODPA uses, I mentioned, the carrot approach instead of the stick approach. So it sets forth a set of compliance standards and suggests that companies maintain one of 8 security frameworks. Doesn't require it, it suggests it. And it doesn't create a minimum cybersecurity standard in Ohio. So if a company's in substantial compliance, and here's where the carrot comes in, I have to emphasize substantial compliance with one of 8 frameworks, which would include HIPAA. It would include, so if you're a medical company, you're probably already complying with HIPAA, but you want to make sure that you are. NIST is another one, CIS is another one. So if you're in substantial compliance with one of the 8 frameworks, and you happen to have a data breach, the company will have the carrot here. Company will have a legal safe harbor related to tort claims that claim failure to adopt appropriate cybersecurity measures. So individuals that sue a company, I referenced the Yahoo and the Equifax lawsuits. Those were tort lawsuits brought against the directors, but there were also tort lawsuits brought against the companies. In Ohio, if you're following substantially complying one of the 8 frameworks listed in the law, you'll have a legal safe harbor related to tort claims. Now, that does not, it only applies to tort claims. I want to be clear here. It doesn't include invasion. So the tort claims we're talking about, invasion of privacy or negligence, it doesn't apply to criminal actions, breach of contract claims, or regulatory actions. So I mentioned substantial compliance. And what you're seeing here is some of the standards that are probably going to be used when determining substantial compliance. An important item here is the resources the company has to expend on cybersecurity. So if a company is implementing a cybersecurity framework, and some of the items that are required for that framework are not necessarily applicable or way too expensive for, let's say, a small business, that would probably be a consideration for that point. However, a company should not be doing the bare minimum here. You should be protecting yourself and your data and the data of individuals. Now we're switching from carrot to stick. So the California Consumer Privacy Act, or the CCPA, which I'm sure a lot of us have heard of, it includes many concepts that closely parallel the GDPR. or Europe's General Data Protection Regulation. And that's the EU or the EEA, the European Economic Area. So the CCPA took effect on January 1st of this year, and it essentially gives California residents the right to have context and learn about the personally identifiable information, or PII, that is collected about them. We use a lot of acronyms when we're talking about data privacy. It allows them the ability to access and obtain copies of their PII, request businesses not sell their PII, request businesses completely delete their PII. I want you all to think about this for just a second. Does your company categorize and catalog all the data that you collect by person, by territory, by jurisdiction? How much of that data that you're collecting is just aggregated, mixed together, stored in different places, not even stored by you, stored by a third party? What data do you collect? Think about that as well. So if an individual contacts you from California, let's say that you're doing business in California, and you collect information of data of a California resident, personally identifiable information, name, email address, phone number. Most e-commerce folks do that. If you're collecting this information and that individual contacts you and says, hey, I want you to delete all my information, how are you going to find everything? How are you going to ensure that everything is done in accordance with law? Well, the easiest way to do this is to make sure that if you're using a third party service provider, let's say they're providing you cloud storage services or cloud SaaS or cloud platform as a service, make sure that your attorney negotiates your contract with that provider such that they're able to comply with requests like this. I can't tell you how much of my day is spent negotiating these types of provisions in these types of agreements. Another way, if you're working with internal IT or internal security folks, make sure that they're assisting and put your right foot forward at the outset. Make sure that this data is able to be tracked and you're able to comply with requests like this. Other states are following suit. New York SHIELD Act, this was passed in 2019, so it's relatively new, but there were new data security requirements which became effective on March 21st of this year. Essentially, this broadens the definition of private information. It expands the definition of what a breach is. It expands the territorial scope, and it imposes data security requirements. So if you're doing business in New York, this is an important law to make sure that you're paying attention to. Next up, I mentioned the GDPR. So the EU, or the European Economic Area's, EEA's, General Data Protection Regulation took effect a couple of years ago, May 25th, 2018. And it completely transformed the way that the data of EU residents is handled. It also completely transformed the way that data is handled around the world, especially in the United States. This was, in many ways, a significant catalyst for data privacy, a legal overhaul for data privacy. It has some significant takeaways that can also be found in California's privacy laws, such as limits on the collection and storage of personal data. It grants the right of access. So a data subject has the right to access their personal information. It gives them the right to be forgotten. It talks about breach reporting and the requirements there. It also includes compliance and training requirements and this concept of data protection officers. So companies are now required, companies that are subject to the GDPR and fit certain certain requirements are now required to have data protection officers in-house. This can also be the same person that's filling several different roles. But who does the GDPR apply to? I think this question's been answered pretty well over the past couple of years. I think at the outset, most companies thought because it was a law that is effective in governing the EU and the EEA, they thought it was just companies that were located in that area. But as I mentioned, this question's been answered pretty well. It applies to any company that's operating within the EU and the EEA, as well as companies outside that are collecting information on individuals that are within the EU or the EEA. Now, the GDPR doesn't explicitly or didn't explicitly define the term data subject, and that's, I mentioned individuals, data subject. So it's anyone that's physically located in the EU or the EEA. And it's an individual that has data that's being processed while they're there. So there's some arguments that it's someone living there, someone's simply passing through there, traveling through there, and their data is collected as they're there. It could be an actual resident, and they don't necessarily have to be physically in the EU or the EEA, or someone that formally resides there. Although I don't know that this has been clarified, not to a black and white extent, and there may be reasons for that. I would suggest that companies that are looking to comply with this are more conservative with their interpretation, and maybe cover most of these categories, if not all. I think that, as you saw in California and New York, this is probably going to be the trend. So getting ahead of this trend and having the proper checks and balances in place is advisable. I do want to skip ahead to get to some more practical stuff and stay within the time period, but I do have slides on Canada's and China's privacy laws in here as well. Canada, because we're really closely situated to Canada here in Ohio, so it's important that you understand the PIPEDA, which is a mouthful. That's Canada's privacy laws, and also China, because a lot of folks do business with China. China has some draconian data privacy laws, which probably won't surprise anyone. One of the most draconian is that data operators are required to store personal information of Chinese resident citizens in China. So that's somewhat draconian. But I want to turn to, so going back to cybersecurity from data privacy, now that we've got a base on data privacy laws, I want to talk about some certain types of attacks and some general things that we're seeing. So general data breaches can happen any number of ways. Think about unauthorized internal or external access. So that's, let's think about sharing or leaving out your passwords. If you're writing your passwords down on paper and leaving them by your computer. Think about disgruntled current or former employees and the keys that they have to your quote unquote kingdom. This list can go on, but I'm talking about general data breaches. I think a lot of companies turn to the cloud as an answer for their data breaches, because and most folks understand that that cloud products are essentially products that are either operating software or storing data in a remote location over the internet. And I personally, I think the cloud is an excellent solution to a lot of things, but I don't think that companies should approach cloud solutions as the end-all be-all solution to everything. In fact, most cloud agreements that I negotiate, and typically I'm negotiating these agreements on behalf of clients that are subscribing to cloud services. Most of those agreements that are created by the cloud service providers start off by saying, look, customer, you're going to handle all the liability and all of the legwork in the event of a data breach. Seems counterintuitive, but I'm telling you right now that that's what most of the contracts for cloud service providers start off with. And I spend probably more than 50% of my day negotiating these types of agreements on behalf of my customers, my clients that are looking to use this. But again, the cloud is not the answer to data breaches. So a couple of years ago, and you probably know about this, Apple suffered what might be the largest high-profile cloud security breach due to the victims involved. So celebrities like Jennifer Lawrence and other celebrities had their private photos leaked online. Most of the victims thought that someone hacked into their phones, but instead, the iCloud service that they use for personal storage was compromised. In response, Apple urged users to employ stronger passwords and introduced a notification system that sends alerts when suspicious account activity is detected. A lot of folks look at Apple as the benchmark for cybersecurity and security in general. And you know, this is a high-profile breach, and it leaked a lot of information, a lot of data. So I would say that when you're using the cloud, you need to understand that it is not the answer to all your problems. Again, the cloud, we're talking about remote storage, software as a service, platform as a service, any combination of any of those. You want to limit removable media in cloud storage. Removable media in cloud storage, limit control over the portability of data. If a company or if an employee needs portable data, limit employees to company-approved solutions that one can monitor and control. And again, when you're talking about your cloud service provider's agreement, make sure that that is thoroughly vetted by your attorney that absolutely understands cybersecurity. When I started in this business years ago, cybersecurity was maybe a word or a sentence in an agreement. It built up to the past 10 years as maybe a paragraph or a section in an agreement, but those were often throwaways for other negotiating points like price, like term. Nowadays, cybersecurity is typically a page or two, especially in the cloud service agreements. It can almost be its own agreement itself, and usually, if not always, is the most important negotiating term in the agreement. What are you going to do to protect my stuff? And who is responsible in the event of a breach? Who handles the liability? I think we saw before that a data breach can cost upwards of $4 million on average. That for most small to medium-sized businesses is a door closer. So make sure that your cloud service contracts are thoroughly vetted. So let's talk about passwords, because this is overlooked all the time, and it's often the cheapest and most simple fix for a lot of cybersecurity breach concerns. First, let me tell you, after some research into this, I was shocked to find, actually, I've known this for a while, but most of the folks that attend my presentations are shocked to find out that the 3 most common passwords in order, and no, this is not a Spaceballs reference for those of you old enough to remember that movie. The 3 most common passwords in order are 1, 2, 3, 4, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Finally, the last one is password. So this is not an urban legend either. This is actual hard data. You can take a look at this slide that I have in front of us right now and see how much the addition of characters and different types of characters as well, not just letters, numbers, symbols. Think about how much adding a character creates time to crack these passwords. Those first 3 passwords are basically the first 3 passwords that any cyber criminal is going to use to try and hack into a system. Passwords should be mandatory and strong. Again, the more characters, the harder to crack. They should be changed at a very minimum once per year. Remember the example I gave of the employee writing down their passwords on a piece of paper. By by the way, this is a shameless plug to, I would advise that everyone start using, if you're not already, password vaults or password maintenance software, something like LastPass. That's what I use, but there are other products out there. Essentially, these are apps that allow you to store your passwords in a safe place, safe being the relative term here, and it allows you to recall very complex passwords so that you don't have to write them down on a piece of paper that can be easily seen by someone else. Going back to passwords, if an organization deals in sensitive, confidential information like medical, financial, legal information, this password requirement is so much more important, and it could actually be mandated by law. Moving on, so I grouped the next three types of attacks together because typically phishing leads to malware and ransomware. Someone can often phish to obtain other valuable information, but typically phishing leads to malware and ransomware. One of my favorite, so phishing actually started a long time ago, but with the internet, phishing has become much more rampant, and the creativity for a lot of these phishing attacks, I'm going to tell you about a specific example, but the creativity has increased. This next slide is not that creative. This is an old email, but I can tell you that, believe it or not, folks are still falling for things like this, things that are clearly phishing attacks. So in this email, we see a request for assistance and strictly confidential. We're introduced to a Nigerian astronaut that's been stranded in space since 1990, and although he's in good humor, he wants to come home. However, the bright spot on this is since he's been up there, he's been accumulating a lot of flight pay and interest, which equals about 15 million American dollars. And it's only going to cost you $3 million to get him home. It's only going to cost $3 million to get him home. So we need some money here, and it goes on. But in any event, do you or your employees know not to open or respond to emails from an unknown source? You have to understand, and you have to make sure that your employees understand that they should not be opening any attachments unless they can 100%, let me say that again, unless they can 100% verify the authenticity of the sender. Do you or your employees know how to recognize an attempted phishing attack? So are you looking at the greetings? Hover over the email address, double check it, hover over links. Make sure that the links are going to where they should go. I typically don't click on links in emails, and I'll tell you why in a minute, but nearly 40% of all employees actually report opening, and those are the ones that are reporting it, open a suspicious email. You have to drill into your own mind as well as that of your employees. When in doubt, throw it out. So I received a recent email, I'd say in the past, well, when I was still in the office, so that had to be January or February. I received an email from a potential client that I had been trying to court and bring into the firm. And this potential client sent me a proposal saying that I want to do business with you. Take a look at the business proposal. And it was a Google Docs link. So I hovered over it. I looked at the email address and I hovered over the link. It was directing me to the Google Docs site that it actually showed on the link. And it was from her email. I went back through my emails, double checked that it was the email that I received. So I actually, I tried calling her and she wasn't in. So I left a voicemail saying, hey, listen, I got your email. If that was you sending, I just want to verify because being in the business that I'm in, I'm a little paranoid. So not hearing from her after an hour or so, I got a little anxious and sent a response. I sent a reply email. Don't do that, but I did it anyway because it was her email address. I said, hey, is this really from you? Can you send me just a PDF so I can look at it? And sure enough, 5 minutes later, she responded back saying, yes, this is from me. I can't send a PDF because I'm away from my desk. Just click on it, and you can take a look at what I want you to help me with. So my gut told me that there was a problem, and I said, you know what? She can wait till tomorrow. I get into work the next day with a voicemail from her saying, listen, I hope you didn't click on that link because someone hacked into my email and started sending emails from my account. And the folks that open it up were sent to another site, asked to put in their password and their username, which I would have never done if I would have even clicked on the link. But in any event, asked to put in their passwords, put in their email addresses, and it propagated to those individuals all of their contacts. So she had a big problem on her hands, but thankfully I didn't click on that. With the current pandemic, quarantine has forced us all to rely now on the internet more than ever. As I mentioned before, a lot of us are working remotely. And as you can see earlier this month, cyber criminals are not dumb. They pick up on headlines, they pick up on important things that are happening around the world, and they use that to their advantage, to take advantage of trusting individuals and trusting businesses. So earlier this month, DHS and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and UK's NCSC issued a joint alert. And essentially what it said is, look, with the COVID, with the pandemic going on right now, we're seeing a lot of COVID-19 related themes by malicious cyber actors. What is everyone getting emails on right now? The paycheck protection loan. A lot of SBA information is coming around. If it's not from a trusted source, be careful. Also, they point out that the surge in teleworking increased the use of potentially vulnerable services such as VPNs, amplifying the threat to individuals and organizations. So I'm constantly online. I log into our server and our system remotely. I have to make sure that I'm protecting that and not clicking on links that I shouldn't be clicking on, and leaving my information open. There also, I don't know if anyone's been a victim of this, but we're doing a Zoom meeting right now, a Zoom presentation. A lot of folks have had their meetings hijacked. Now, the less harmful hijacks were the folks that are showing video, very sensitive video clips over Zoom meetings. But others are folks that may be listening into private meetings where sensitive information is shared. And that's something that you have to be careful with. Make sure you're checking on your participants and you know who is in if you're in a private meeting. So I mentioned before that I would go into a little bit more detail about what a business is going to lose in a breach. So we see that everyone is aware that a business usually loses money in the form of revenue or time, but a lot of folks don't really think about the loss of goodwill and business reputation or the loss of intellectual property. And for small businesses, that is often their bread and butter. Sure, you may have brick and mortar, you may have equipment assets, but a lot of times your value is in your goodwill and business reputation or your intellectual property. If you have someone that is sitting on your servers just stealing your intellectual property, it could even be intellectual property that hasn't been released yet, or intellectual property that isn't protected by patent or trademark or copyright. That's something that could potentially put you out of business. And again, I'm not talking about all of the other costs that are involved with the data breach under laws. You're talking about lawsuits. You're talking about the costs of notifying everyone whose data may have been accessed. You're talking about the cost of government fines and fees. I'm also talking here about loss of goodwill and business reputation. Nowadays, a data breach is a scarlet letter for businesses. And if you are a business, a small business that has a couple of really big customers, and you are breached and the data that is lost or compromised is sensitive, or it's made public, then how much are you losing in the way of business reputation? How many customers are going to walk away from you? How much goodwill are you losing? These are things, the goodwill, business reputation, intellectual property are things that businesses have to start thinking through when they're weighing whether or not to become secure. So what should you be doing? Well, I don't think it's necessary that you unplug everything and disconnect from the internet. But you have to get comfortable with this subject matter. Cybersecurity has been an uncomfortable topic for most folks for a long time. A lot of companies look at this, or at least looked at this once upon a time, as unnecessary, as expensive. We started going with a flat fee program for our clients because they can see what their bottom line is going to be at the outset. But you have to get comfortable with this subject matter. A phrase that's often used by CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, that I work with, as well as folks in the industry that I work with, is that brakes make the car go faster. A lot of people see brakes as a restrictive measure. A lot of people see cybersecurity as a restrictive measure. But that's not the case, at least from my and our perspective. How fast are you going to go in a car with crummy brakes? If you've got state-of-the-art brakes, you can go as fast as you want, of course, obeying the speed limit, but you can go as fast as you want. The same is true with cybersecurity. If you have the right framework implemented, and you've got the right areas protected and the right folks involved, then you can sleep at night. You can rest assured. You can also go out to your customers and your clients and you can say, listen, I am doing what it takes. Come to me because my competitor across the street is not implementing these same measures. So you need to get buy-in. In order to implement something like this, the most important, I guess the most important first step is get buy-in from the highest levels. If I'm the IT guy, or I'm the internal cybersecurity folk, or the internal person that is saying, hey, we should be doing this, but the president or the CEO or the CTO or whoever's at the high levels that make this decision is not on board, you're not really going to go far until you get a breach. You need to budget for this. Another phrase that is used a lot is that prevention is ideal, but detection is a must. So I would say that with a good cybersecurity framework, you're going to prevent most breaches, but not all of them. Your weakest links typically are the human beings. And I see that we're running close on time, but although you may not prevent every single breach, you have to be able to detect them, and you have to be able to know what happened there. That includes risk assessment, protection, testing, and monitoring. Practice for a breach. That's what we call a tabletop exercise. This is important too. A lot of small businesses assume that their IT providers are also their cybersecurity experts. That is not true. Most of the time, these two do not go hand in hand. Think about a foot surgeon and a brain surgeon. Both doctors, but they both work on very different parts of the body, and I wouldn't want my brain surgeon working on my foot and vice versa. That's the same with your IT provider and your cybersecurity technical expert. Make sure that you're having this conversation with your folks. Also, public relations is very important. There are blogs out there that have no problem airing a company's dirty laundry if they're breached. How do you want your data to get out? Or how do you want your information to get out? You have to make sure that you control, never, ever, ever, ever lie, by the way, but you have to make sure that you control how your breach is portrayed to your public, to your customers, your potential customers. But that's important. Now for some practical tips. So obviously this isn't a big issue right now because I don't know, most folks are probably not heading out to a Starbucks and setting up camp. They used to, and this may happen after the stay-at-home orders are lifted and folks get comfortable with doing it. But I brought up Trump because a couple of years ago, some security researchers at Avast Software went to the Republican National Convention. They set up a series of fake Wi-Fi networks and thousands logged on. More than 1,200 connected, and of those, 70% had their identities exposed. Think about that. Hackers routinely set these up in places like Starbucks. They set up fake Wi-Fi hotspots. They name them things like Google Starbucks and Xfinity Wi-Fi. Once they do, the hacker is able to monitor and intercept any data that's transmitted through it, including emails, think about logging on to your bank account, and any other personal data that's sent that you may not want to get out there. So when it's an issue again, it may be an issue in some sense, but avoid public and other unsecured Wi-Fi. So an open Wi-Fi system is no different than leaving your house in the morning with the front door wide open. You wouldn't do that. Make sure that you're not leaving your network exposed by using an open Wi-Fi network. Next up, back up everything and do it often. So in May of last year, Baltimore got hit with ransomware. It locked up officials' data, temporarily crippled key parts of their administrative operations, and months later, they were still trying to fix the damage. And since the ransomware they suffered, at least an estimated $18 million in lost revenue and recovery costs. All of this could have been prevented by backing up software and backing up data. So what's the moral of this story? Make sure you're backing up everything. Back it up and back it up often. In the event of a cyber attack that shuts down or kills a company's system or a city's system, it must have the ability to restore from ground zero. Believe it or not, you can actually go online and find out whether or not the cyber criminal group that is holding you ransom has a good rating for returning all the data. They'll rate them by percentages or stars. But I would say that a lot of the data that is recovered is typically corrupted. And do you really want to use the data that a cyber criminal had their fingers all over? You have to be able to have the ability to restore from ground zero. You can't do this unless you're routinely backing up everything. Again, I mentioned cloud services providers. If you're using a third party, if you're using the cloud or a third party service provider, make sure this is in the contract. Make sure they're obligated to back up everything often, or have your attorney make sure. Again, this is often negotiated term in the contracts that I work on. Social media. So think about the information that is shared on social media. Recently, everyone's posting their graduation pictures, their 10 biggest musical influences, birthdays. How many of these things are used in your passwords? Probably a lot. This is possible information hackers can use to get inside of your business. So first off, make sure that you're establishing a governance program. Make sure you're thinking before you post. And also make sure that your employees or you understand how to make the information that you're posting private, only shared with individuals that you're friends with or that you're connected with, that you know who they are. I also can't tell you how many times I get messages from folks that say, don't accept this or click on this through a social media post because I was hacked and now I have to rebuild everything and get a new cell phone number. Social media has irrevocably blurred the line between public and private, but this doesn't mean that you have to, or your employees have to share everything all the time. In fact, the more that they share, the easier it's going to become for a phisher to gain trust and therefore gain access. This will happen to you, or it already has. I get tired of saying the whole, it's not a question of if, but it's a question of when. I'm sure you've probably heard that before, but it's likely going to happen to you. A lot of folks sitting here listening to this presentation may say, sure, it's probably not going to happen to me. It'll happen to this other person that I know, but it's not going to happen to me. It's probably going to happen to you. It could be happening to you right now, and you may not even know about it. I had a client that had a hacker sitting on their servers for a couple of years, just siphoning off intellectual property and financial information. So next I want to talk about the 4 pillars of proactive protection, okay? And this is important. Make sure at the outset you've got a legal professional protecting you. Why? Well, not just for making sure that your employment and your internal policies, including your website policies, are all up to date with respect to data privacy laws, but you also want to have that person in place in the event of a breach. Because when you contact them and say, hey, Dave, I had a breach, we're in the world of attorney-client privilege at that point. You have your attorney run everything through them. They hire the security technical person. They talk to the insurance person and make sure that they're aware of a breach. They talk to the accounting professional. All of this is to a certain extent protected information. And at this point, we're controlling what gets out and how it gets out. Accounting individuals are really important. You have your SOC audits, you have the other audits that may be required by your cybersecurity framework. I can't say enough about security technical companies. You've got folks that need to come in and do penetration on the front end. They do penetration tests. They may do audits of your servers. They may do phishing audits in your company to see how open or how exposed you are. Very important to have a security professional. And on the back end, after, they're there to help fix the breach and determine what data was exposed, which you have to know for purposes of disclosure and notice provisions. And they're also there to help prevent it from happening again. And then finally, insurance. There's not enough that I can say about insurance, but you need to make sure that you have, first of all, if you don't have commercial, general commercial liability insurance, then you should run out and get it right away if you're operating a business. I've spoken to, for some reason, I've spoken to a few businesses in the past couple months that don't have that, but I encourage them to go out and get it. Second, I think that you need to make sure that your insurance includes cybersecurity protection, because there is a big cost to that. There may be government fines and fees. There might be costs to notifying millions of individuals that their data was breached. There may be costs, legal costs with respect to settling lawsuits. So these are all things that are important. You have to make sure that these are covered in your insurance policy. Make sure your agent understands your business as well. And finally, before we get to the questions, the most important thing that I can impart to you is communication, internally as well as with your professionals. Make sure that you're talking about this. I had a client that was very reluctant to share with me that they had been breached. And by the time they did share with me, a lot of damage had been done. They should have contacted me right away so we could have prevented as much damage. Internally, do your employees know what a phishing email looks like? Do your employees know what their policies are? These are all important. So with that, I will start taking some questions. And while I'm doing that, feel free to write down my information. And after this presentation, contact me directly if you like. I'm happy to send you a copy of the presentation for some of the information you may have missed. Also, feel free to contact Chris at OhioX. He can also provide you with that information as well. Chris, is now a good time to get started on the questions? Is there anything else I need to cover?
No, that's great. Thank you, David. And I messaged you a few that I had gathered coming to me, and then I also messaged everyone on the chat. Feel free to submit on there, but I'll read a couple of the ones that I had gathered. I guess the first 1 and 2 are kind of similar, but with work from home and people using home internet and their home computers, is there a increased data and cyber concern for businesses, meaning that people aren't, sitting in the office 9 to 5, I think the question's getting to, and they're using, work internet, work computers, with people, perhaps using, personal computers and internet to be able to search and shop and all that. Do you think that there will be a trend in these weeks and months with increased data issues?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But maybe not the way that the person asking the question thinks. So most of the time, home internet is a secure internet. I can't speak to every single situation, whether or not someone's in an apartment building using potentially open Wi-Fi, or they don't have a secured Wi-Fi. But for most folks that are working from home, they're working from a secure location. And then, there are other variables that can be thrown into that, like if you're logging into your company system remotely, if you're VPNing in, so that's virtual private network. There are other different variables that can be built into that. But as far as open Wi-Fi, I don't know that that's necessarily a concern right now. What is a concern is the increase in phishing phishing emails. So we see an uptick in many different types of phishing emails. You've got your government loans. So the SBA has been putting out quite a bit on their loan programs. The FMLA revisions also are things that have been widely disseminated. Those are being disseminated by web pages, by email. I know that my firm sends a lot of information out there, but what we're seeing now is a lot of emails going to folks that are including links they're essentially phishing emails, and they're specifically tailored to those types of things. Other types of phishing emails that you see coming out are information statistics on COVID-19, and folks are following those, clicking on those, and then I don't know about you or those of you that are watching or listening to this, but if you scroll through Facebook or any of the other social media platforms, you see a lot of folks are sharing very personal information, mainly because we're all lonely and we're bored at home. But they're sharing their musical influences. They're sharing their graduation pictures. They're sharing their a lot of other things that if their privacy settings aren't set correctly, anyone can see that. And I saw Jim Smith graduated from Garfield High School in 1984. How much you want to bet that his password is either the school mascot in 1984 or some combination of the school name in 1984. So there's a lot of things there, not necessarily open Wi-Fi issues, but I think you're going to see a ton of phishing, and it's going to continue to move to the red, the higher saturation of phishing emails as things continue.
Thank you. And one other another question that was submitted that I have to share is at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned directors and officers, in some cases, starting to become personally liable for data breaches. Is this a trend that you think will continue, or might there be legislation around it? And then also, I guess from a question that I'll tack onto this, are there different layers to that between, because certainly there's a difference between officers and directors of a Fortune 100 company compared to a small business, family-owned business, for instance, that doesn't, is drastically different than a multinational corporation. So I guess back to your opening information about directors and officers and their liability for breaches.
Sure. So, well, the duty that directors and officers owe to their company, to their shareholders, to the public, all of that, it varies from state to state, and that's either statutory or case law, so court-made law. So some states that are more conservative and are more protective of businesses, I would say that Ohio is one. You can find more like Delaware. They're probably going to be more protective of that, and I would think that would be less of a case in those types of states than states like California, where the individual often has the upper hand as opposed to businesses. So there's that layer, that level. I think this is a trend that's going to continue. I think it's going to be codified in laws. I think what you're going to see is almost like a spectrum or a smell test, or like Ohio in their Ohio Data Protection Act. Ohio weighs a lot of different factors when determining whether or not a company has substantially complied with the law or with the cybersecurity framework. How much money does the company have? What kind of data is it collecting? What framework is it following? If I'm a hospital that's collecting sensitive medical information on many people, and I'm using the least amount of resources to protect that data, and I'm using a really inapplicable framework, and I'm not using HIPAA or high tech, well, then I'm probably not going to be able to avail myself of the Ohio Data Protection Act. Whereas if I'm really protective of that data and doing everything that I can, and I still get breached, I'm probably going to be protected under Ohio's law. Now, substitute company for director or officers. Georgia refused to dismiss the lawsuit from against the directors because they knew there was a problem and they should have done something. So I think to the extent that folks are aware that they're inadequately, they're poorly protected, but they're collecting sensitive data. And again, remember, names, addresses, phone numbers, that's in some states, that's sensitive, that's very sensitive data. That's personally identifiable information. That if they know that they're not protecting it appropriately, then they are probably going to be liable in those states, in those cases where it's easy to see that that's the trend. States like Ohio, which are more conservative, I think it's going to take a little bit longer, but I don't think it's out of the question.
Great, thank you, David. And I think this is a good point. We're right at about 1 hour. So David, thank you very much for taking the time to share your expertise and your work with us. For anyone interested, as David mentioned, you can see his phone number and his email there at Meyers Roman on the screen. So consider reaching out to him directly if you have any questions or comments. And likewise, we at OhioX appreciate you tuning in today and taking the time to join us for this presentation on data and cybersecurity. So thank you very much.